once you are in that state, anything anybody else does to try to get you out of it is probably just going to make it worse.
Oh, it's gasoline.
Never in the history of mankind has telling someone to calm down led them to calm down.
Howdy, friends. Craig here. Now, normally, when I do an expert roundtable, that expert roundtable will have some of the top minds about the subject sitting around, and we'll discuss whatever it is. This is different. What I did is I looked out into my audience for people who are similar to me. They love tabletop gaming. They love Malifaux. But they struggle to win on a consistent basis. And I thought it would be interesting to have us sit down and talk about the struggles, talk about why we lose. And it turned out to be a really interesting episode. And I think that even if you're somebody who struggles to win at the game or somebody who's a top player, I think you're going to find some interesting things said, things you relate to, things maybe that you've always thought but never heard verbalized. So sit back, relax, and let's talk about why we lose.
Playing a tabletop strategy game allows you to unplug and test your skills against friends. Every week, Third Floor Wars delivers useful strategies, discussions, battle reports, and reviews to tabletop games like Malifaux. If you want to get better at the games you already play or discover the games other people are playing, you are in the right place. Craig and Ray welcome you to the Third Floor and the Tabletop Talk broadcast.
Craig here on the Third Floor. Regular listeners to the podcast know I search the world for expert guests. Whether I'm looking for a player who has proven themselves, maybe for an episode about strategy or tactics, or maybe a deep dive, or I'm looking for somebody who's an expert in the field or a designer for that insider insights. That's generally speaking what you can expect from Tabletop Talk. What we've got today is a little different. What I've done today is I've gotten together three players, three friends of mine who are very similar to me. So they love tabletop gaming. They love playing minis. They love playing board games in a lot of cases. They love Malifaux. I know all three of them through Malifaux. But like me, they struggle. Does not mean that they don't win. I win sometimes. I had a hell of a run at Nova back over a year ago. Then you saw me play one of the worst games I've ever played on live stream, where I just handed a game over to one of the guests here. And the three other people that are here today are similar, right? So they love the game. They have times when they win, but they struggle. And what I was hoping to do today is really kind of talk with these guys and have the four of us really kind of talk through where we struggle, where we still struggle, where we have overcome things and gotten better. More importantly than anything is, why do we still play? So what is it that keeps us coming back for more? So my first guest is Nick Westbrook. Now, he's a good friend of mine and a generous patron of Third Floor Wars. He plays out of the Texas meta and was a player on one of our recent Star Wars RPG actual play episodes. So Nick, welcome back to the Third Floor.
Craig, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and not a reference in your bloopers. So I'm excited.
Well, it's nice to have somebody on the Texas meta that's not going to come in here and claim that none of their models ever die and they score 8 points. So that's refreshing. So Nick, part of this answer I know because you and I have been doing some gaming together during all of this. But outside of mini gaming, what are you doing to keep yourself busy?
Man, been doing a lot of tabletop simulator with some friends of ours, kind of keeping me and my wife and a couple friend of ours entertained once or twice a week, and really just spending a lot of time with the kids, which is great awesome. Because one of your episodes about gaming with children and families has really helped me involve my two children into games and. Getting prepared for a Star Wars campaign with my family myself. So taking what we learned from our sessions and just diving in and showing that to my family. So it's a good thing.
That's cool. My daughter is 6 years old, and I just bought. I haven't gotten it yet in the mail. That I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's called like There Is No Evil or something like that. And basically, it is it's an introductory role playing game like meant for kids, 8 years and under, and built so even a kid who's 7 or 8 years old can run it. And I watched some videos on it and read about it and talked to my wife, and she said, yeah, I'll play. So I'm really looking forward to it. I've got a sneaking suspicion my daughter's going to love it. You can make it whatever with unicorns and pets and stuff like that. So I'll be interested, but it makes me happy, Nick, that you're able to do that with the crew. On Tabletop Simulator, what games are you guys playing with your friends?
We've been playing a lot of Arkham. Oh my gosh, Arkham is huge with my little group. Believe it or not, my little board game group kind of created our own Malifaux meta in South Houston. One guy came to the board game night with a picture of Teddy and a Dreamer crew, and we just all fell over all the pictures that we saw, and we bought a starter kit, and we had 6 people hammering over one table just trying to learn these rules, and every one of us picked a different faction, and as everybody knows here, you buy the entire freaking faction.
Sure. Being
a completionist, and we just all went nuts over this game, and
that's great.
So I play a lot of Vassal.
Yeah, I know you do. So I see you on there looking for games all the time. Well, that's cool. So my next guest is Brian Schoner. He was a guest for episode 32 way back when, where we talked about growth leagues. He's a henchman down in the Atlanta meta. I'll have a link to that episode in the show notes. It's a good one, especially when we start playing in person again. Growth leagues are kind of a good way to kind of get things kick-started. So Brian, welcome back to the third floor.
Thanks, Craig. I'm glad you finally have another episode that I qualify for.
Well, I am a big fan of your podcast. And one of the things that I love listening to on your podcast is keeping up on board games, which I just don't have time to play nearly as much. So I'd be very curious to know what you consider maybe the top 2 board games that you're loving right now.
Oh, gosh. We haven't been doing as much board gaming outside the stuff we're talking about for the show lately, just because our schedules have been a little harder to coordinate. But as far as recent stuff that's come out that I'm really into, not that recent, but one that I really like from the past 12 months is called The King's Dilemma. It's sort of it's a relatively simple mechanical game, but you get to role play a lot of really sort of dastardly noble houses plotting and scheming, and it tells some really interesting stories. And mostly I'm kind of waiting for the upcoming Kickstarter harvest season to come in. Yeah, because I've got a lot of items on deck that I'm really excited to see coming in.
Very cool. Very, very cool. So my last guest, which at the last minute, I almost kicked him out of here. You guys all know him as the man who took me down on the live stream. It is Jim Ortiz. Now, Jim and I have been friends. Jim, we've got to be coming on, I don't know, 5 years, 6 years?
That sounds about right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we met through Malifaux. Jim is based here out of the Raleigh area. Jim has been and continues to be one of my favorite opponents. Jim and I always end up having a good game. Sometimes I win, sometimes Jim wins. I don't know if in memory, Jim, where we've ever had a really one-sided game. I always remember at least being close going into the last 2 turns. And of course, it was quite a exciting last turn, last flip for us on the live stream. But it's good to have you actually on the podcast, Jim. So welcome back to the third floor.
Oh, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So Jim, how about you, man? What have you been doing other than beating my ass at Malifaux?
I've been playing a bit of World of Warcraft. Vassal is not a thing that I'm real comfortable with. And I have listened to your episode on it, and it's not for me. I've looked into tabletop sim, and I struggle a bit with some of the physics in those for dice rolling and some of the other things. So playing tabletop games online just doesn't seem like a thing that I'm super interested in. So I've been sort of out of the tabletop space and into more online video gaming.
Yeah. Now you and your wife is a big board gamer, just like you are. Have you guys been playing at all, or are you just pretty much everything on hold?
We've been doing a lot of. She plays WoW as well, and we've been doing a lot of that.
Nice.
We haven't put as many tabletop games or board games on the table as we probably should.
Well, and Jim is also one of the regulars for my Camping with Gamers. So Jim and I, while we're waiting for everybody to come on, we're talking about how excited we are to be going camping again for our fall trip coming up here. So guys, what we're going to do, we're going to take a quick break. And what we've done is we've broken this down into several different segments. The first thing I want to talk to these gentlemen about is different areas where we struggle. And one of the places where I struggle, and I'm interested to know if these guys struggle as well, is before any mini hits the table. So I want to talk about struggling pregame before the game even starts. So we'll be right back. Howdy friend, Craig here. Is this episode making you realize you need to buy some models? Gadzooks Gaming is my favorite online retailer because of their large selection, killer prices, and great customer service. Don't you hate buying an entire crew box when you only need one model? Gadzooks sells crew box models individually and saves you a ton of money. They even have free shipping to the US and Canada if you spend $100 or more. Swing by gadzooksgaming.com and make sure you tell them Craig from the third floor sent you. All the details are in the show notes. So if you watch the live stream where I play Jim, it comes down to a very exciting last flip. And I think that if you didn't know any better, it would seem that I just got unlucky at the end. But the reality is that I can go back, and I might do that at some point, and I can show you all the different times where I made poor choices, suboptimal choices that culminated in me losing the game at the very end. And one of the phases where I struggle, Brian, is I struggle before the game even starts. So let's talk in the context of Malifaux, but we don't have to limit ourselves to Malifaux. Let's start off with crew selection. Brian, is that something that you feel like you've got a good handle on, or do you feel like you tend to make mistakes at the crew selection time?
Well, I'm sure it's one of the places I make mistakes. I think it's one of the areas I've actually gotten better in. When I first got into Malifaux in second edition, like we were talking about during the break, I decided I was going to play 10 Thunders and basically bought the entire faction. And I had all these cool models and I wanted to play with them all. So I was playing a different master every week. And as a result, I didn't really know what I was doing with any of them. So I sort of recommitted when I started on third edition, and I'm going to pick, one or two masters, really focus on playing them consistently and learn them better. And it's helped a lot. So I feel like my master selection has gotten a lot better. Crew selection, I still have a tendency to get too clever.
Yeah.
It's like sometimes I just, I pick, well, I need this guy to do some scheme marker placement and this to do some anti-scheming and this to do some healing. And then I've got 5 soul stones left. And it's like, well, I don't actually have any beaters. So that's the thing I'm trying to focus on right now, is making sure I can handle all of the basic necessities before I start doing some clever bits.
Yeah, that happens to me too, Brian, where my theory faux brain comes in and like I got this all planned out and I get this Rube Goldberg machine going where I'm going to have Sun Quang do this and then I'm going to have this guy do this and they're all going to be there and I'm going to flip red jokers and boom, I'm going to win the game.
I have a great plan for when the opponent doesn't do anything during their turns.
Yep.
Flawless.
Yep. As opposed to, I'm starting to realize that thinking in lanes, right? And to your point, saying, hey, here's my beater lane, right? And do I need one or two beaters based off of, who I'm up against and things like that, and kind of learning roles as opposed to very specific tech picks. So I completely understand that. How about you, Nick? Do you struggle at all with crew selection?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Being a 10 Thunders player, so many of the masters are very forgiving with a versatile pool as great as we have. And so it hasn't been as tough on me as prior when I was in Guild. But in 2E, I ran Guild, and there was one Nelly list that had a couple little flex spots, and they were mercs. And all I had to do is listen to the recent Max Value podcast and go, okay, I like that idea. A 4 AP bishop, great, let's bring him in. And that's what it was. In third edition, everything's viable. Everything has play, and you're looking to more gear your master and crew selection towards the scheme and strats better, and then also trying to counter or at least throw some tech picks against your opponent and what information you have about your opponent. And that's the struggle I have is kind of bringing it all together. I do definitely focus on those little combo wombos where it takes 9 different activations and 7 cards to make happen. And all of a sudden you got this irreplaceable model on the table, but it's not feasible. It's not doable. Especially in our meta where everything's so aggressive and you're getting beat on turn 1.
Yeah.
And so you're in defense mode right out the gate. So
one thing I was going to mention when you were talking about getting the tech picks against your opponent's master, that's one place where I tend to fall into traps because I don't get as many games in as I'd like, especially now with the COVID situation. So I don't know a lot of the opposing masters very well. Now, I listen to a lot of, very useful podcasts, like, say, Third Floor Wars. And, so I have sort of a sheet of crib notes, like, or if I'm going against Rasputina, I have these things to worry about. If I'm going against the Vix, I need these things to worry about. But because I don't play them that often, I tend to look at that list and then swing way too heavily towards those particular tech picks,
right,
where I maybe need one, if any of them.
Yep. No. How about you, Jim? If when you finish a game that you've lost or that you struggled in, how often do you go back and go, you know what? I really kind of screwed myself from the beginning, either based off of the keyword I chose or, I really thought that these 2 models were the way to go and they didn't do jack for me. How often is this the culprit?
So I think what I find interesting about your statement is the thing that I think makes me a bad player or gives me a struggle with this is that I don't actually spend as much time as I probably should after that game coming back through all of those particular moves and going, that model that I put 10 stones into really didn't get me 10 stones of work. As opposed to, well, that was fun. I moved some models around and I flipped some cards and that was a good time. And so I think basically just listening to you at this point is like, oh, that's a thing that I could definitely start doing to improve my gameplay overall, is just to reevaluate at the end of a game. Was this model useful for me?
Well, and let's be honest, right? Yeah. And the 4 of us are living proof of this. You don't have to win every game of Malifaux to have fun playing Malifaux. I would venture to guess when we get to the part of this podcast where we talk about what do we love and why do we come back, what Jim just said, I bet is going to be a theme. We love hanging out with friends. We love taking little toy soldiers and pushing them around and flipping cards. And, that's a big part of it. So by no means, Jim, is this like, you got homework now, right? You need to go back and watch our 5-hour live stream and deconstruct.
and I definitely plan to watch it. But I think, one of my notes about crew selection and being, having struggles there is that there's a lot of cards for me and a lot of cards for my opponent, and reading cards is not really the way I learn things. Mm-hmm. So I definitely struggle. I can literally, when, we'll get to the table and we'll exchange cards and I flip through and I read them, I try to skim, but, immediately when I hand them back, I'm like, I don't really remember that way. That's not.
I don't ever do that, Jim. I used to, right? I used to say, can I see your cards? I don't do that anymore. Now in game, and I did it to you a couple times in our game, I'll say, hey, can I see the Seamus card? Sure. But part of that though is, I have gathered because of this, silly podcast, a pretty decent meta knowledge, right? I've either done a deep dive on every keyword out there, or I've, talked for 5 hours about every keyword out there. So, when I go up against somebody now, I have a decent idea of what I'm dealing with, and I just need specifics, which is a huge advantage. But even when explorers come out, when I go up against my first explorer crew, I'm going to go, well, what's their shtick, right? Like, what's the kind of their deal? And I would hope that whoever I'm playing can, within a paragraph, tell me what their deal is. And then we'll kind of go from there. Because Jim, I'm the same way. I can't read a card and digest it and make it usable information for a live game. Mm-hmm. I can barely write my name, let alone take in information like that. So Jim, talking about the next phase, right? So this is one of the many places where I felt I lost the game with you. Is how often do you think your scheme selection is subpar?
For schemes, I think part of my issue there is that sometimes, again, it comes back to lack of knowledge of the opponent's crews and what they can do. So sometimes I'll sort of bottleneck myself into, I'm going to take these two schemes before I even know what they're going to do.
Yeah.
And sometimes I've talked to Ray about this back in second, and it was a recurring theme. He says, you have to have at least 3.
Yeah.
And then when you know what your opponent's going to do or what going to bring, then you can narrow it down to 2. And I think that one of the things there are certain schemes that will require you to choose an opponent's model, choose an opponent's enforcer to make sure that they are above half wounds or whatever it happens to be right at the time. And those for me, I really struggle with. And it'll be something like choose a minion. And it's like, well, there's 2 of those. How am I going to remember which one I said it was versus him saying, well, that's, the blue one versus the red one, or so on and so forth. So it's automatically sort of limiting my choice of 5 down to a choice of, say, 4.
Sure.
And then I'm already starting off on the back foot. So that's definitely a place that could use work.
Yeah. Now, how about you, Nick? How many times do you, when the game is over, gone, man, if I had just picked Assassinate, I would have won this freaking game?
Just about every one of them. It's absurd, especially with Getting Grounds 1, with the difference between the first point and the second point, on the scheme selection. And I'm not going to lie, I'm constantly forgetting who the hell I targeted when it comes to like Vendetta. I'll send model A in, but I actually had it on model B to model C and declare it. And all of a sudden, oh, wait, no, never mind. Just kidding. And trying to figure out a way of reminding myself who do I have it on. And so I tend to lean towards the easier schemes to achieve, where I'm not having to run across the table and drop multiple markers and focus on something. I mean, I've got a Fuhatsu in my lineup. I'm going to pick Vendetta,
right,
and stay far back, or a claim jump, or leave your mark. Those are ones I gravitate towards, just because, especially in our meta, I'm going to get Nakima shoved down my throat round 1. So I need to have something that I can kind of feed her off to the left, so I can go to the right and score a placement VP, and then trying to take that same mentality to Vassal, where you've got players all across the world that don't play that way, and I'm prepping to the wrong crowd at that point, and so I'm losing again, because I'm prepped to be defense only and kind of sit there when I'm getting schemed all over the place, and Colette's throwing me all over the board and dropping markers, and I have no idea what the hell's going on.
So, Nick, you kind of talked about 2 things there, and I want to kind of clarify it a little bit. Maybe it falls into both, right? So you have a situation where I picked the wrong schemes, or a situation where I may have picked the right schemes, but I'm not executing on scoring them well. Which of those things are the bigger challenge for you? Executing the schemes you chose, or just you picked bad schemes?
You know what? Now that you put it that way, it's executing the schemes I've chosen.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I get lost in the 900 other decisions in the game.
Yep.
Trying to figure out what Black Blood's going to do to me, as opposed to Hayridden and to the other models, and what blasting does to them, and whatever it is. I get lost in those bubbles, and those thought bubbles, to where I forget about everything else around me.
Yep.
And I'm either in defense or offense mode, and not scheme mode. Or what's points as prizes? I got that told me
points
the
or prizes.
other day.
That's what our UK friends say. Now, how about you, Brian? When you go back and Monday morning quarterback a game where you struggled, is it scheme selection for you as well?
That's certainly a big part of it. And, like Jim mentioned, that's not something I do as often as I should. I'll usually sit there a few minutes after the game and look at, think about a lot of times how I would have chosen my crew differently, with hindsight being 2020. But, I'm usually hot and tired and my brain's full.
Yeah.
But what I find about schemes, especially in Gaining Grounds 1, where they tend to be a little bit more complicated in general, is I am less often choosing the schemes I want to take than eliminating the ones I don't want to take, because it's really complicated, or it's going to be hard against this particular crew, or I didn't wind up hiring the people I would need to do that. So I guess it'll be, leave your mark in runic bindings, not because I really went for that. So that's something I'm needing to, and again, almost everything I say is going to come back to I need to play more games just to get more familiar with and more used to how to execute these ones that seem excessively complicated, excessively difficult.
Yeah, and it's amazing, isn't it, Brian? Because, I remember when a new Gaining Grounds would come out in 2. And, the first time you're like, wow, these are so complicated. These are so hard. This is so weird. Like, Supply Wagon. What does this mean? What does that mean? It takes 2 games. It takes 2 or 3 games for you to kind of wrap your head around it. On the live stream, when I played Jim, it was the first time I'd done ley lines. And I had read ley lines a million times, understood it. You put it on the table, and I'm like, yeah, this is not what I thought it was.
Exactly.
This is different.
For sure.
Now I'm going to understand it much better, right? So I will play it much differently. I get what it is. I thought it was one thing because it read that way, but once the models hit the table, I realized it's not exactly what I thought it was. So that tends to be one of the things. Now, Jim, after the cameras turned off on our game, one of the things that you and I talked about is you felt you really struggled with your model placement at the beginning. I had practiced our deployment turn 1.
No, it's your attic.
Yeah, a huge advantage, right? With all of those advantages, I still lost. But it's where the reason I practice turn 1 and before almost every match is because that's where I screw up all the time. And you mentioned that deployment kind of messed you up a little bit. Is that something that's common for you, or is it just something that kind of happened to you on Sunday?
I think as I pick up, say, a new crew, I think the more reps I get in with a crew, or I guess a master in general, but the less that becomes an issue. But definitely the first few games, it's an issue, or when it's, the first time I've used corner in a while, or the first time I play flank after, several games of standard or what's the pyramid now?
Wedge.
So the first time I see a particular deployment or use a particular crew, it definitely can be an issue with, terrain bottlenecks or activation order. In our game, my Gravedigger was essentially hemmed in behind all the other models, but truly wanted to go first to give everybody fast and then get out of the way. But basically gave everybody focused, and then was like, well, I guess I'm stuck here because everybody's in my way. I can't get out. So I sort of ended up, a half turn behind with that model.
Yeah, and Brian, there's kind of a couple different places where that happens, right? So you can do, and they feed off of each other. So there's placement, right? So I put my models in the wrong place, which is a little bit what Jim was just talking about, where he should have left a gap for the Gravedigger and he didn't. There's also mistakes in activation order. So it sounds like Jim got his activation order right. His placement was wrong. I've struggled both ways, which is I activate the wrong models early on, which screws up my deployment. How about you? When you struggle there, what does that struggle tend to be?
Well, I mean, my main problem from a deployment standpoint tends to be that I don't have as exact of a plan as I should. I've got Misaki here. She's going to be teleporting to one of these spaces and running around and picking off scheme runners. And I've got a Toto, and he's going to run up the middle and punch somebody in the face. And then I have a couple Torakage, for example, and they're going to run around and do scheme things. And that's about as detailed as it gets. So I one of the things I'm trying to do is, and not just during deployment, but during the game in general, I'm trying to slow myself down. Because I have this tendency to say, well, I don't want to take a really long time on this because it'll be annoying my opponent and the game will take forever. So sometimes I just make a decision and go. And I'm really trying to get myself to the point where I'm willing to take the extra time to say, all right, so he moves 12 inches a turn. If I go to here, I have to go around that thing to avoid the opponent. Then I can put a scheme marker here and another one there. And I'm really trying to plan those out in detail. Once I know what I'm doing, the actual placement and activation order tends to work out pretty well for me.
Yeah, if you get working backwards, right, Brian? So if you say this is the end state, this is what it's going to look like when I'm done. Now let's walk this backwards. It looks like what does it look like from the beginning? How about you, Nick? Do you struggle with deployment at all?
Oh, tremendously. Yeah, I'm kind of the same way as Brian is I feel bad for my opponent because I see my opponent just looking at me going, come on, dude, let's get this going. And I'm thinking, and I got, I'm trying to mathematize this whole thing on the table. And it just comes to a point where it's like, well, I know I need to do these 3 things. I don't know what happens on step 4, 5, and 6. Screw it. Throw it on the table. I've gotten better as I make mistakes because I'm a glutton for punishment and I learned the hard way. But for the most part, I'm kind of in the same boat. I kind of know what might be the easiest path depending on terrain to kind of move a bubble up or to, spread out if I need to, if they're independent operators. But I screw up consistently on deployment for sure.
Yeah, and the one thing I'll throw out there for those listening is I highly recommend what I just talked about, which is if you get the opportunity, if you know what the crew is, if you have an idea what the deployment is, put the models on the table. And without an opponent around, without other models activating, just go through your first turn activations. Activate every model once and see how it works together. Then you avoid mistakes, like having your Gravedigger not have enough room. Because you make that when you're sitting at your kitchen table, as opposed to when you're, broadcasting to 200 people live on a live stream. It is something I've learned the hard way, and it's just a technique that's worked for me. Brian, you're going to say something?
Well, I was just going to say Vassal is also a great tool for that. Whether or not you're willing to do a game or that kind of thing, it's very easy to say, all right, if I've got a wedge deployment here and I need to get to the center line, it'll take him 1 activation, then I'll be within 3 inches of X.
Yeah. Which gets to the working backwards thing that you were just talking about, Brian, which I completely understand. So, guys, what we're going to do is we're going to take a break. When we get back from the break, we're going to talk about struggles in game. So we talked about struggles that we have before the game even starts. But a lot of us tend to struggle when the game is happening, which ultimately leads to us being short a point or two to a victory. So let's talk about some in-game struggles. We'll be right back. Howdy friends, Craig here. You deserve a new playmat. Here on the 3rd floor, we use Mats by Mars. They are scratch resistant, waterproof, wet erase marker compatible, almost free of glare and lighter than neoprene. Mats by Mars gives you over 40 designs to choose from. You pick a mat, pick a design, and then you pick an overlay, like one for Marvel Crisis Protocol, Star Wars Legion, or even Malifaux 3rd Edition. Those overlays will really speed up your deployment and make the placement of objective markers so easy. Use our promotion code in the show notes to get a 10% discount on your first order. In the notes of your order, you can even request the 3rd floor logo on your mat for free. That makes the best mat in the business even a little better. So get some new mats, save yourself some money, and help support the show. Go to matsbymars.com. All the details are in the show notes, including the discount code. So mistakes are made before models even hit the table, and then more mistakes are made as models start getting pushed around. I have a lot of different places where I struggle during the game, Nick. One of the places where I tend to struggle is something that you've already kind of alluded to, which is I lose track of how to score points. I lose track of scoring points, and I start doing stupid things. I take that back. It's not stupid, useless things. Things that are not helping the cause, which I think at the time might matter later, or isn't hurting anything, right? Me attacking this model doesn't hurt anything. Let's flip some cards. Not realizing that, that's taking up resources and burning and spending resources. You talked about it a little bit, Nick, but from a perspective of losing your focus on scoring, which is all that really matters, but losing your focus in general, how much of a struggle has that been for you?
It's been a struggle. The game is so complex and deep. I feel like I'm playing checkers and everybody else is playing chess or 4D chess. And I struggle trying to keep on task on what I need to do to score those points, where these models need to be, where my lodestone needs to be at the end of the turn, or reacting to the board state. It's easy, like we've mentioned in earlier, it's easy to assume everything's going in your way. You've got a handful of severes, and there's no terrain on the board, and there's no models in your way threatening you. You just kind of move up the board and score points. But when you get an opposing keyword on the other side of the table with unique abilities that could potentially take you off your game and move you around out of position, and you've got to react to those things, that's when I really start losing my focus on scoring, because I'm just reacting to what my opponent's doing to me.
Well, and that's going to lead me to my follow-up question for you, Nick, is what's distracting you? And it sounds like you struggle with something I struggle with, which is I become reactive, right? So a classic Craig move. My model is standing there who hasn't activated yet. Some beater comes in, beats the bejesus out of that model, and that model is down to 1 wound or maybe is a corpse marker now. What I tend to do, and I've gotten better about this, but we'll talk about that later, but what I'll do is that's it, I'm going after that beater. That beater just beat up my model, and now I've got my beater here, and my beater's going to go up and beat it. That's my next activation, which is silly because now I'm beating up a model that's already activated, right? So whereas I've got potentially other places I should be looking, other locations where there's unactivated opponent models that are still going to impact what happens that turn. But no, I get so focused on that. Other places are flips. So for Jim, like, have you ever had a flip throw you off and make you lose focus?
I feel like that's actually one of the things that I've gotten a lot better at, is that, I can't help a flip, right? When I flip that black joker, and a model doesn't die, or, no damage, or, I can't hit or whatever. That's not something I can do anything about. So I've gotten a lot better about at least not completely losing it over that kind of stuff.
Do you find yourself losing focus while you're playing though?
Where I struggle in this sort of space is it'll be something like spending good money after bad. Yeah. It'll be, where I went to attack and it's like, I have an AP for this, and I can spend an AP on it. And if it doesn't work, I have to use that other AP for something else. And I'll say, well, but it didn't work, but it could work on the next flip, right? If I fish for that next card, right, it'll be that sort of thing. Or something like I'll hold my mid of cards and I'll say, I could cheat this 12, and I'll have forgotten that I really needed that 12 for the flintlock shot that's coming up on my next activation. I really, really, really need that 12. Yep. And if I cheat it here, it'll, maybe put an extra wound on your model. But if I cheat it over there, it'll score me a point or prevent you from scoring a point, which is much more important. And so it's just that blip of distraction where it's like, if I could just spend a little bad money after that good money, or a little good money after that bad money, then I'll come out ahead. And that's where that happens to me.
It's so easy to do, so easy to do. How about you, Brian? When you find yourself losing focus, taking your eyes off the prize, where does that tend to happen?
I mean, it's a lot of the same stuff that Jim and Nick pointed out. I actually literally have written in my notes throwing good soul stones after bad, because it's exactly that concept. Well, I've got my beater up in there and he's getting hit pretty hard. So rather than just accepting that he's probably going to die and doing things that matter, I'm like, well, I need to activate him and he needs to heal. And then I need to bring this other guy over here and heal him and pull him out of combat. And the problem I fundamentally have with Malifaux, one of the reasons I love Malifaux is because there's 100 things going on at any given time. There's 15 to 20 models out there that are all capable of doing different things. They all have different objectives. They all have different possibilities. And while there are those million possibilities, the problem is figuring out which ones are really important right now. I have the same problem that I tend to cheat on less important things earlier in the turn because I have the cards and that kind of thing. So, yeah, I mean, it's a lot of the same items we have, same issues that Jim and Nick have talked about.
I like your point, Brian, that it's part of the reason why we love the game, too. An analogy that I have come up with that I'm still playing around with, so it may not be one I keep, but I was thinking about Guild Ball, right? Guild Ball recently was announced that it's dead, that they're ending Guild Ball. And one of the reasons they listed is something I've been saying about Guild Ball for a while. It's something that I talked about why I stopped playing Guild Ball. In fact, I think Jim, we didn't meet at Malifaux. We met playing Guild Ball, I think. Now that I'm sitting here saying this out loud.
I want to say we met playing Malifaux, but shortly thereafter,
played some
realized
Guild Ball.
that we both played Guild Ball.
Yeah. Guild Ball to me was chess, right? And here's why. What was good about Guild Ball is it was clean, and chess is clean. If you were a competitive player, the better Guild Ball player always won. They always did. And if two experts could sit down, you could have Cody and Doug commenting on doing commentary on a live stream of Guild Ball. And you won't have this conversation where, I think, Craig might be okay. I think that's a decent decision. And then Doug goes, well, I don't know, Cody, I think this might be a better decision. Those conversations didn't happen in Guild Ball because there was a right decision and a wrong decision. It's the same way when you're talking about chess. I always felt Malifaux was a little bit more like Go. For those of you that are familiar with Go, which is my preferred game between the two. And what I like about Go is it is, I find, far more complicated. A lot less linear, and it's very rare that you have a Go conversation that goes, that stone should have gone there that turn, and that was the only right play. And it's very, very different when you read books about strategy of Go versus books of strategy about chess. And I feel Malifaux is more on the Go side, where it's more conceptual. It's less, this was the right decision here and there. I don't think anybody can go into the game except for the last flip but with Jim and I and go, that was the moment Craig lost the game, right? Because I think I could have two very good Malifaux players watch that entire matchup and they would disagree when I lost the game, which is part of what I love about Malifaux. But getting back this long tangent, and I apologize, but this long tangent was started by Brian, but that's what I like, right? I like the fact that there is a myriad of options and not all of them are bad and there's one good. But you have to stay focused in that process. And if there's one single thing that has made me better over the 4 years I've been playing Malifaux, not as good as I'd like to be, it is my ability to stay more focused pre-game, during the game, when flips happen, so on and so forth. And that's really why I wanted to talk about focus so much. But Nick, there's other things that can cause us, in game to really mess up. And one of those is not understanding what's happening on the other side of the table. So I'd be curious to know whether not knowing why opponents are making the moves that they're making or not knowing what their models do, how often is your inability to get the right information out of your opponent impacting your wins and losses?
It's definitely impactful. I struggle with knowing what other crews can do and their kind of synergies that work amongst themselves. It was said earlier that I have to experience it. I can't just read it on a card and learn the hard way. Just kind of go, oh crap, okay, check mark. I'm going to put that as a bullet point in my head for next time I face this crew. And it's just one of those things that's just how I learn. Is more of a reactive as opposed to being proactive. I do try to focus on certain key elements to try to. I'm not going to read everybody's card 100%. Every card, every ability. I learned the hard way, unfortunately, but I do try to get certain key bits of information. I'll ask what you mentioned earlier. What's the shtick? What's this crew do? And I'm hoping for information like, oh, we throw ice pillars and pull slow everywhere. Okay, great. I'll stay away from the ice pillars, or whatever it happens to be. I'll ask certain questions. I'll focus on threat ranges.
Yep. That's a reflection of your meta, though, a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I know that a mature can hit you from 22 inches away.
Mm-hmm.
So knowing that, I kind of hyper focus on certain key data points and work around that and let the aha moments and the surprises and the learning lessons happen naturally.
Right.
So it makes it, I don't want to say, it just makes it more interesting for me because I'm learning something new every game.
Yep.
And it's more obvious. It's not crap. I should have cheated my 8 of crows instead of my 12 of crows because of blah, blah, blah. I don't think that way. It's not me. I find it more interesting that way, at least for my playstyle.
How about for you, Brian? How often do you attribute some of your struggles with your ability to gather information and process information real time on the table?
I mean, gathering information tends to not be difficult when I take the point to do it because, Malifaux players are almost unanimously all gentlemen. If you want to see the card and figure out why are you placing that, they'll tell you. Yep. So, for me, it's mostly, if there's a crew that, on the first turn, they're doing a bunch of maneuvering around and pushing each other and drawing cards and giving each other focus and that kind of thing. The main problem I have is figuring out, okay, which of those models is actually the most important part of that process that I have to worry about? Because I know if you have an Ironsides crew, they're all going to be hanging out within a certain radius of each other, so they all give each other buffs. But if I know that, Amin and I do is one of the crucial ones for what we're trying to do, that's where I have to focus my attention.
Right.
So it's really just sort of picking apart that web of interactions. I don't need to know what every little thing is, but where's the linchpin? And that's the interesting bit.
That's a great point, Brian. And you hear me talk about it on the pod all the time, which is threat assessments and being able to pick your targets and understand, who are the threats. And the threats don't necessarily mean the beaters. And your example is an example there where Amino is the threat. And if you can break that link in the chain, your chances of beating Ironsides go way up. And being able to assess that, it can be critical. Jim, taking and processing information, assessing threats, how much does that lead to you losing?
So I have a note from earlier that is, Gaining Grounds versions are reset buttons. And M3 was a big, huge reset button. And I feel like in M2, I was starting to get to the point where I began to, see some of the things my opponent was doing and began to think about, okay, how can I stop them from getting, they're going to be on, ley lines or whatever it happens to be. And I want to make sure that I can deny. Whereas now in what is GG1, that's not really where my headspace is. I'm sure that it's absolutely impacting, my game state, but it's not a thing that I'm as cognizant of because right now the things I have to worry about are making sure I know the rules for my cards. I know, how to get my model to the place I want my model to be and those sorts of things. So for me, where I'm at this point in what is GG1, my knowing as much about my opponent is just not where I'm at.
Yeah, you're in the phase, Jim, that I talk about all the time, which is I'm still playing my crew. I'm not playing Malifaux yet. I'm still playing my crew because I don't think you can actually play Malifaux until you stop playing your crew, which means you know what your crew does. Right. You're not picking up 3 cards before every activation. You're not trying to figure out what happens if I, cheat in a crow. You know all this, which means it allows you to actually focus on the table itself. Probably one of the things that you hear talked about a lot, Brian, and I'd be curious to know because you and I have played against each other, and I consider you a pretty even-keeled guy. Do you find yourself going on what's called tilt? Do you find yourself basically losing it? And, you could have a series of bad flips or bad decisions or things go your way, or maybe you've sabotaged yourself and you now emotionally are out of the game and can't recover. Is that an issue for you?
That has never really been a problem for me. Part of it is, as I say, Malifaux players in general and the Atlanta meta in particular are just all super nice and chill people that are so easy to get along with, regardless of how it's going, that even when I'm getting my butt kicked, I'm generally having a good time.
Right.
That said, I've run enough events as a TO that I can see the effect that tilts have on people that are, I guess, character-wise, just more susceptible to it for whatever reason. And the problem with folks that have that issue, and I don't want to say it's the problem with them, but the problem for them is once you are in that state, anything anybody else does to try to get you out of it is probably just going to make it worse.
Oh, it's gasoline.
Never in the history of mankind has telling someone to calm down led them to calm down.
Yeah. Anybody who's married knows that. No, it's very true. It's a state, to your point, Brian. It's a state that you can only take yourself out of. Nobody's going to pull you out of it itself. Nick, have you ever lost your cool playing?
I haven't lost my cool. I've given up mentally based off of poor decisions I've made.
That's a form of tilt.
Yeah. I've given up mentally just based off of my own decisions that I've made on the table that was the turning point, at least in my mind, of, yeah, I'm losing this game. I'm not even competing at this point.
Yep.
You've killed your vendetta target round one. You go, what the heck was I thinking? So just certain key moments like that, I will kick myself. And if I was to analyze the choices I made shortly thereafter, those key moments when I give up or I make a bad decision that I know, I do make poor decisions just to maybe give my opponents still some experience or try to minimize BP dip. I don't know, not to be a sore loser. That's when I start drinking. So it is what it is.
It's funny, Nick, and I hadn't even thought about it until you brought it up. But, we talk about, tilt being the, I'm so angry and I get thrown off my game and I'm making bad decisions after bad decisions. But I have experienced exactly what you're talking about, which is you have decided this game is over. It's turn 2, right? You've decided because I lost Archie that this game is over. I am no longer competitive anymore. And guess what? You've lost the game, right? You're guaranteed to have lost the game, even if your opponent picks up half their crew next turn. You still lost the game.
Sorry, just one thing I wanted to throw in there is I think I may have an advantage in that respect because while it was in M2E, I was one of those rare people that won a game after being tabled. So that has sort of ingrained in me that, never give up, never surrender.
That's funny. The unicorn game, right? That's we always hear of legend. So I talk about how Jim has always been one of my favorite people to play games with. Jim and I play board games. We play Guild Ball. We played Malifaux. And part of the reason is that Jim has taught me how to be an even keel guy at the table. But what I don't know is what's going on in Jim's head. So I'd be curious to know, Jim, do you find yourself beating yourself in your head in the same way that Nick was talking about, or do you go on tilt and maybe we don't see it?
So I would say that when I tilt, it'll be in a casual game and it'll be, just something, it'll just a rant, and I'll rant for, a couple minutes about, these models are stupid and they shouldn't be in the game, right? This is just ridiculous. There's no reason for them to, why are all their target numbers 4? That's just dumb, right? And and then I'll just move on. I think Brian mentioned losing. I think it was Brian mentioned losing an assassinate target earlier, a vendetta target early, and I specifically remember a game where that happened to me, and it was like round 1, and I had just started to kind of move him forward, and he was wiped off the board, and I was like, well, shoot, I'm 2 points down now.
Yeah.
What am I going to do? How can I make this close? What can I do to recover from this? So I think the thing that gets me is towards the late game. I think early game, my plan is still sort of formed. And I'm like, I got to score those first points on those schemes. I got to score, at least the first 2 on the strat. And then as it starts to get harder, right? And especially in the new M3 gaining grounds, all of the strats they get progressively harder.
Yep.
To score those points
exponentially.
And so at turn 1, you're like, oh, that was an easy one. It's a gimme, right? It's always the gimme. And then you get that turn 2 and you're like, that was a little bit harder, but he's not quite there to get in my way yet. And then on turn 3, it's like, oh man, now I got to get my model over to his deployment while stopping him from killing a model in my deployment or something like that. So it's those later turns where it's like, when I start to not see the thing that will get me a point, right? And or the thing that will stop him from getting a point. And that's where I start to really struggle. And I get that state of analysis paralysis. And I go, okay, something on this board has to be useful. And I stop and I'm staring at the board. And that's, when Ray will say, okay, Jim, you You got to do something. You got to move a model. Pick one and activate a model. Yeah. You got to pick one and do it. And it's like, all right, well, I'm going to pick one and do it. And I'm going to swing twice at the, elemental flame or whatever, right? And it's like that. Yep. It didn't gain me points. It didn't help me stop you from scoring points. And that's the part where I struggle. And when it comes down to, I don't think I can score more points, then it starts to go, oh, okay, well, what am I going to do now? Like killing that model doesn't gain me a point. It doesn't lose you a point. So
but
there's
it makes
no
you
point.
Feel better.
I think it used to. and the more I learn about, like you say, points and prizes, right? And it's like, if it doesn't, having him pick up that model and score a point doesn't make me feel better.
Yeah. Well, and here's another aspect, and I'd be curious, and I'll probably start with you, Nick. Something that happens to me, and this specifically happened to me on my Sunday live stream with Jim, is, and I haven't come up with a word for it yet, and hopefully you guys are all going to nod as I start describing it, is procrastinating, right? So here's what happened to me on Sunday. Oh my God, it's turn 4. When did that happen? Right? Like it seems like 2 seconds ago it was turn 2, and I had the whole game to, score my first point on this and get my second point set up for that. Now all of a sudden it is turn 4 and I've got 8 activations left before the game is over. So Nick, does that happen to you where like all of a sudden it's just like, what happened? Why did I spend so much time wasting turn 2 and turn 3? And now I'm turn 4 and I'm behind, and I don't have any more throwaway activations. And if he kills a model, I'm done.
Right. Turn 4 and turn 5 is where I score my points in my area because I'm just on defense mode, or trying to.
You're surviving.
I'm surviving, or I'm trying to fight fire with fire, which doesn't work. At least for me. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. There's times when it's like, oh my God, this turn 4, and I gotta at least reveal 2 of these schemes, and then I gotta do the final. There's no way I'm dropping 6 markers for spread them out or whatever. And so I'm trying to grasp at straws, looking for opportunities to just score 1, 2, or 3 points, whatever I can get. But absolutely, yeah, I find myself in that space fairly often.
Do you find yourself running out of time, Brian?
Oh God, yes. Yeah, I have a tendency to, like I said, and part of it is because I don't necessarily have a firm plan for all of my models. So a lot of times some of those models are just like, all right, well, you go up the middle and be ready to fight, I guess. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely the sort of thing where I've made a conscious effort recently to score as much as I can, get the first points for my schemes on turn 2, turn 3, because if I don't, that's just not going to happen. Right. Because there are too many other things to worry about. And like you mentioned earlier, with loss of focus, I get pulled away. I'm getting engaged over here. And now I can't do any of the things I need to do before the end of the game.
Jim, how do you pace yourself? How do you control time and take care of making sure that turn 4 isn't the turn 4 that I had, where I was like, yeah, I've got 8 activations to lay down 15 markers.
I don't think I had 8 activations on turn 4 in that game. So it would have been nice to look up at 8 activations. So I think to Brian's point, I try to score early. Because I feel like, one, it gets my stuff out of the way, and then I can start to think about, well, how do I get the second point of leave your mark? Because frankly, when I'm starting the game, I think about the first point. Yeah. And it's like, okay, that first point is relatively simple, right? Assuming that Craig didn't decide the middle of the board belonged to him. The first point of leave your mark is a relatively simple one. The second one becomes, a bit more cumbersome. And so if I have to score, that first point on turn 4, then I can't even get to that point to score that second scheme point. So scoring early is definitely a thing. I think, again, the big struggle I have with time management is just the amount of looking for the best thing to do. And, you look at your 6 models on turn 3 and you're like, man, one of these, everybody wants to go last, but somebody has to go first. Yep. And I feel like in my list in our game, I had a lot of models that was like, boy, if they could go last, I could flip that scheme marker that he placed into a corpse marker, and he'll be like, man, now I can't get my point. That's gonna stink. Or if Seamus goes last, he can terrorize that model off that ley line marker, and that'll be that's better because then he denies a point. And so all 6 models wanted to go last, but they can't go last. So somebody has to go, but that model that goes is basically put in a vulnerable position. Well, which one is the least vulnerable, and so on and so forth.
And all of that, Jim, ties into something I preach, which is get your reps in, right? That's where you have to get the games in. That's where you have to learn the games. And sometimes you might be in a situation, Jim, depending on this game, is instead of 2 dead doxies, maybe 2 dead dandies are the way to go because of exactly what you're talking about. Have one go early and leave the other one late, or maybe everybody who plays Seamus wants to activate Seamus last. That is always what you want to do. But sometimes that's not what you should do. That doesn't score you the points, even though in theory, a last activation Seamus is the way to go. So guys, what we're going to do is we're going to take another break, and we're going to talk about the sunnier side. All of us on this podcast right now have been playing games for several years, have been playing Malifaux for at least 2 to 3 years, and a lot of other games for longer. And we want to talk about some of our victories. I want to talk about some of the demons we have slain and how we have gotten better over time. So we're going to talk about where we don't struggle as much as we used to. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Keith Suderman, and I'm a patron of Third Floor Wars. You'll never mistake me for a competitive player, but I really enjoy the analysis and the advice I get from Tabletop Talk. You should be a patron too. Head on over to patreon.com and search for Third Floor Wars, or just click the link in the show notes below.
What is it worth to you to get this podcast on a weekly basis? Is it worth $1 a month? $5 a month? $20 a month? If you'd like to help support the work that we're doing here on Third Floor Wars, please go by our Patreon. We're at patreon.com/Third Floor Wars. There you can pledge at any level, any dollar amount. Whatever you give us will help us put out quality content on a regular basis and hopefully make tabletop gaming a little bit better for you every week. Hey, need to give a quick shout out to our newest patrons, Joshua Hatch, Donald Kroger, John Fox, David, Anthony, Alexander, Michael, Bob Fletcher, Old Doc Fulton, and Joseph Pye. Because of you and the 100 plus other patrons, I'm able to put out consistent content that hopefully you find worth paying for. So it's time to talk about success stories. Now, I've got a sneaking suspicion that there are people listening right now that have more than once gone, yeah, I do that too. Yeah, I do that too. Because everybody has done the mistakes that the 4 of us have talked about here in the first, several segments. What I want to talk about is things that we've conquered, things that we have beat, because even Cody has made every mistake that we've talked about. Even Jim Varney has made every mistake. Even Alex Drake has made every mistake that we've talked about. But in their own way, with their own methods, they've gotten better and they've overcome these things. And you know what? Even quote unquote scrubs like us have done that the same. So Jim, I want to hear your success story. If we go back and look at Jim playing Malifaux 2 years ago versus Jim playing Malifaux now, what are things that you don't do anymore and how did you beat it?
So I think one of them for sure is completely forgetting that I'm playing a scheme game and going to kill models. I think that part of the reason is that I think that's one of my big draws to Malifaux is that there are so many goals within the game that aren't just about killing each other. But early in my Malifaux life, killing models was fun and cool, right? You flip high cards and tally marks and pick up models, and that's fun. But the more I play, the more I want to remember, I want to score points and I want to stop people from scoring points. So one of the things that Ray and I had talked about at some point back in 2E and I've tried to start doing again for 3 is keeping my selected schemes in my hand next to my fate deck or my fate hand, so that every turn, every activation, when I look at my hand, I look at my schemes. And I go, oh yeah, I'm trying to do leave your mark. oh yeah, but Craig's completely owned the center of the board. How am I going to do that?
Yep.
How do I get this point? Right. I need to think about it every turn, every activation. I need to remember it. So that's definitely one for me.
Yeah, that's been a standard Ray piece of advice here in the NC meta that almost everybody in NC now does is we keep if you look at my little, I don't hold my control hand in my hand. I've got one of those little stands where you slide your cards into it. But the far left of it are my strat and my 2 schemes and then my control hand. So when I look left to right, the first thing I look at is my strat. Then I look at my 2 schemes. Then I can see my control hand. And if you play Malifaux, how many times in a turn do you look at your control hand? You look at it all the time. And for you, Jim, it was just a matter of a couple little triggers, mental triggers to make you just to stay focused on that. Silly things like holding it in the hand.
I think holding it in my hand definitely was. I mean, and it sounds silly, but you have to look at it. And when you look at it, you go, oh yeah, that's important to me.
What else pushed you over that hump, though?
Again, I think part of it is the community. I think is a definite good one. I play games with Sam and with Ray and Kirby and all the guys, and they'd say, well, at the end of a game, they'll go, what did killing this model get you? Yep. You killed Archie. Congratulations. What did it do for you? And I'm like, well, I felt better because I killed Archie. Right? Archie pushed my model off the table and killed this other model that was going to do something, and I felt better. He says, but what did it do for you? Right. Yeah. And so that we have a wonderful community that, will take the time to say, if you want to be better, we'll try to help you get better. It's definitely one of the things that helped me see that, paying attention to those schemes is much more important than that.
Well, Jimmy and I are lucky. We play in a meta that is active, competent, competitive, and generous.
Yes.
And we're very lucky to have all of those things. When game nights were a thing, you remember that, guys? When we had game nights. When game nights were a thing, I mean, it would be disappointing to have 6 people show up. It would be very active, outside of a few select, everybody was even keeled. Couldn't wait to play. You could have the best person in the meta playing the worst person in the meta. The 2 of them would have fun, and they would both come out better players because of the discussions and the level of generosity that was shared, which is something to foster in the communities that you have. How about you, Brian? What dragon have you slain?
Well, like I said, the big one, like I mentioned earlier, is that I'm able to. I've been committed to playing 1 or 2 crews a lot, and like you mentioned earlier, Craig, that's a matter of learning not just how to play your crew, or rather learning how to play your crew so that you can play the game. Yeah. So that's been a big one for me.
So how did that work, though, Brian? So, right, we can talk about that. You hear me say that over and over again on the podcast, right? I can preach those words, and you said those words. What clicked for you, right? So how did you push the cart over the speed bump?
Honestly, part of it is that I wanted to win more games. And, like Jim said earlier, I think it was Jim, M3E was a huge reset button for the game. Yep. And so it was something that's okay. I already have all the crews, so it's not like I have to, do the new shiny thing. I didn't change factions. So I am just going to pick 3 masters that I think can cover all the basic stuff. And that's all I'm going to play. I mean, I did a couple games early on as I was figuring out who I wanted those 3 to be. But since then, I've been doing Misaki, Asami, Yanlo, and pretty much just Misaki and Asami for almost everything I play. Yeah. And honestly, because I'm seeing the positive results of that, because I'm recognizing now I know what this stuff does. Now I don't have to read Asami's card every turn to figure out how far away, the summon thing can charge as if it was place instead of charge. I'm seeing the results. And it's kind of like a diet or exercise plan, which is something I've never been good at, as you can tell looking at a webcam. But it's like when you start seeing results, it teaches you you're going in the right direction. Keep doing this thing.
Mm-hmm. So, Nick, if you're going to go back and talk to Nick, who just started playing Malifaux, what would you say? Hey, buddy, you suck at this now, but you're going to end up beating it. What is that?
Oh, man, stay focused, which is we talked about earlier, I'm not good at. But keep your eye on the prize. I find myself continuously trying to improve. That's my nature, looking forward, making small goals and continuously improving on everything I do. Part of that, as everybody else has alluded to, being in a meta that's generous and welcoming and warm and just great people. Malifaux people are the best in the industry, in the space, in multiple spaces. The people have made it, at least made it for me, an easier transition coming from something. I came as a board gamer and tried Malifaux for the first time, and came in right when Wave 5 was in 2E, and started hitting podium near the end of it. So I had I was continuously improving, and part of that was a direct commitment to improve and engrossing myself in as much content as I could. I'm not big on, like I said, reading cards, and it's repetition. So I'll listen to your deep dives over and over and over again. And just get some of these abilities and some of these things in my head to where I can have those aha moments on the table. Like, oh, I remember, Steve mentioned that it did this, or Jamie Varney mentioned that this guy did this and this and this. I'm going to make sure I watch out for that, or tech against it just in case if it happens.
So I'd be interested, Nick. Think of one thing though. Like, what is the one thing that really you struggled with that you just don't find yourself struggling with as much anymore?
Anymore?
What's an aspect? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Anymore now is understanding what other keywords do, and I directly relate that to Vassal.
Yeah,
I know Vassal is not the same as tabletop gaming in person. There's a disconnect. A certain level of disconnect that you have, but the Vassal community
is awesome.
Yeah. And it's better than nothing. Absolutely. You get to try so many different things. You can get a game. If you can't sleep one night, you get to hang out with Jamie Varney in the UK because it's 8:00 on a Saturday there. And it's, middle of the night in your time.
You're underselling it a little bit, Nick, and part of it I think you're doing because you know that I don't play Vassal because I don't like Vassal. But here's the reality of Vassal:
peer pressure. I'm working on it. Right.
One is whether I like it or not doesn't freaking matter, right? Vassal is awesome, and Vassal is awesome for several reasons. One, you have, instead of the 10 guys that play and gals that play at the local store to play with, you have the entire world. Instead of Nick playing in the Texas meta every time, going up against Nekaba down his throat every time, he now knows how Poland plays. He now knows how Australia plays. He knows how the UK plays. And Nick, you've got to be getting in 5-6 games a week.
Absolutely. Yes,
as much as I see you on there. And that's called getting in your reps.
Mm-hmm. And
it's called exposure.
Right. And I've learned that each meta, and I think we all know this, but each meta has its own kind of strategy of approaching the game and how they build crews and how they tackle the strats and schemes. How it happens here in Texas is completely different than playing Dan or Reese over in the UK. And one of my biggest things that I try to improve on, or one of the things that's helped me tremendously, is I'll flat out say after the game, hey, did you see anything I did that was screwed up or that I did wrong, or that you question, why the hell is this guy doing it? And let's chat. And everybody's so welcoming in this community.
So good about it.
It's amazing.
You have to ask the question, though. I mean, my big jump in capabilities, so I got the reputation of being a terrible player via Travis Wayforth and Max Value. All right, that's where the Craig is bad at this game brand began, and it was well deserved. And part of the reason I'm better than that person that I talk about is because of Alex Schmidt, who is one of the guys that played locally here, who I would argue is one of the best people to ever play Malifaux. He doesn't play anymore, unfortunately. But Alex was very generous with me and spent a lot of time saying, Craig, let's play some games. And he would whoop my ass. And at the end of it, he would go, why are you doing this? And eventually what would end up happening is Alex and I played more is he would do it mid-game. I would start to activate a model. And he goes, why are you activating that model? And I'll explain it to him. And he goes, okay, well, what about this model? And slowly started to rewire my head a little bit. And finding a mentor that way, for those of you listening, is really good. And Vassal is a great way to do it. And doing exactly what Nick talked about, which is asking the questions at the end. So maybe you won't find that a really good player that you can get 10 games in like I happened to, and I was really lucky to do. But you can find, a mentor, a new mentor every time you play. And learn to ask the right questions and learn to be putting it in there. So, guys, we're going to take one more break. When we get back from this break, the last thing I want to talk about is a little bit of a love letter. I want to talk about why we love tabletop gaming so much, whether it be board games, mini games, role-playing games. It's not because we like winning, right? That's the whole theme of this podcast for this, at least this episode. So what is it really that we love about it? And quite frankly, considering, that this is, September 1st of 2020, what do we miss? So we'll be right back. Howdy friends, Craig here. Nothing makes Malifaux easier than having the right tools. Here at the third floor, we love all the licensed Malifaux goodies from Custom Meeple. Not only are they helping support this podcast, they sell custom-made weird licensed tokens and terrain. They sell it all. Crew boxes, terrain, markers, tokens, and even a 3x3 full Malifaux board. Custom Meeple sells a complete M3E token set covering every marker and token you need to play. Custom Meeple are the source for the official accessories for Malifaux. Everything is designed by hand and authorized by Weird Games. Check them out at custommeeple.com, that's with one M, or follow the link in the show notes. Up your Malifaux game and be sure to tell them Craig from the third floor sent you. If you use the promo code Third Floor Friend, all one word, THIRDFLOORFRIEND, you'll get a 5% discount and help support the podcast. It's valid on everything except retail products and playmats. I spent a little time last segment talking about how awesome Vassal is, but people have also heard me talk about the fact that I don't like Vassal, and that's despite the best efforts of Nick. Nick is a great ambassador for Vassal. I've played Nick once or twice, I think, now on Vassal, and I don't enjoy it. And probably one of the biggest things I figured out about the lockdown is it allowed me to solidify things that I love about tabletop gaming. And I think I underestimated how much my love of tabletop gaming came down to being in the same room with somebody and interacting in an analog way. So no technology, in the same room, and putting mind against mind, either cooperatively or competitively. I always knew I'd like that about tabletop gaming, but I didn't realize that it was a keystone until this lockdown, because I have tried to do tabletop gaming without one of those elements, and it's fallen apart for me. The only place where it's kind of clicked is with role playing, but that's kind of a different animal. I think that's more, I think it lends itself more to remote play. And I think it's part of the reason that of the entire industry, the one that's booming right now is role playing. Mini games are struggling, and tabletop games and board games are struggling. But role playing games right now, this could potentially be the greatest thing that ever happened to role playing is this pandemic. So Nick, how about you? Like, go back and think about how you got drawn in. I can see you on webcam. You've got board games, shelves of board games behind you. What made you fall in love with tabletop gaming, and what do you miss a little bit right now?
Gotcha. Well, first off, this is a Zoom background. It's not for real. Don't tell my wife.
That's right. You haven't spent money on mini games and board games in 10 years now? I think we've got a nice streak going.
Yeah. Don't ask about LVO. Holy crap. You serve alcohol in the tournament area and have vendors? Yeah. Thanks. Weird and battle foam. I love the camaraderie at the table. The people, the Malifaux community is fantastic. My little meta kind of was created off of a board game group that we knew each other and hung out once or twice a week already, and then blossomed to learn all the other players here in the Houston area. And then when this COVID thing happened, branching out into Vassal, I kind of had the same reservations. I'm one of the types that does not play with a mic when I play. I'm not gonna lie. I'm like Cody. I play Call of Duty, Modern Warfare, Warzone, and I don't play with a mic because I have no interest in hanging out with 14-year-olds that call me dirty, racist names. I have no interest in that whatsoever. But the Malifaux community is amazing, and if anyone is worried about online play in Malifaux and who they're going to talk to and the personalities, reach out to me. We'll have a chat. We'll play. I'll teach the game. It's fantastic. You have to give it a shot. Take a chance. It's an amazing experience in this day and age where we don't get much experience with other people. Being able to say that I have friends now in the UK, if and when we ever get a chance to do a UK national trip from America, if they ever allow us, depending on our situation,
get our stuff together so we can actually go over to another country. That'd be nice.
But it's just it's an amazing opportunity and experience. If you're serious about wanting to be better and compete, you got to try the metas. You got to try how other people play. John Fox ran me through what he does and destroyed me. I've played guys from Washington. I've played guys from UK, Russia, Sweden, Australia, New Zealand. It's amazing.
It is amazing, Nick. And what I'll tell you, and I'm going to hammer on one point, and then we're going to talk to Brian a little bit, but the one point I'm going to hammer on, and this amazed me. So the one of the many things that's been great about this podcast is I now have literally talked to people who play Malifaux all over the world. And it's incredible how the one thing everybody says is how nice their community is and how generous the community is. So for whatever reason, and I don't know what it is, because I have been in the Guild Ball communities, I have been in Warhammer communities, I have, been adjacent to many other mini games communities. I have not seen anything close to it. The closest I've seen is Marvel Crisis Protocol, but I can't even tell you that is true because it's really kind of such a huge overlap between my Malifaux people, so it's kind of like the same group. But there's something unique about Malifaux, and I don't know what it is or why it attracts those people or it fosters those attitudes. Right. But it's very, very true. So, Brian, not only do you play tabletop games, board games, I don't even know, do you role play at all?
Yep, and like you were saying, I'm role playing more now than I ever have.
Yep. So RPGs and then mini games. You create content. You have a fantastic podcast devoted to tabletop gaming. What is it that you love so much?
It's interesting because probably my most defining personality trait is that I'm an introvert. I hate people. You guys are okay. But and of course, that's not what I mean when I say I'm an introvert. But when I spend a lot of time interacting with people over extended extended period of time, I get drained.
It's exhausting. Yep.
So, this is a way that it's something I can do sort of by myself, whether it be theory foeing or, that kind of thing, and still test my brain and that sort of thing. But it's also, I can interact with someone or multiple someones, be social, have a good time, and know that there is a defined endpoint when I can say, all right, now I'm done. Now I can go home and decompress. So that's, I think that's a big thing for me because I do like interacting with people. I like telling stories. I like sharing, information about things that I like, which is why I got into the podcasting thing in the first place. The thing that I think really drives me about Malifaux, and this is something I discovered in the process of doing the board game podcast, is several of my favorite board games like Macau and Innovation are two that come to mind, which won't mean anything unless you happen to have played either of those. But they're games where each turn you basically have a bunch of random variables and you are trying to optimize what you're doing within that limited decision space. And that is really at the heart of Malifaux, I think. Yep. Is that there's, like we talked about before, there's so many things going on, and you just have to find out what is the best course to take at this time. I also did want to piggyback a little bit on what Nick was saying about the exposure to different metas being so good. I haven't played nearly as much on Vassal as I'd like. But I have had the chance, before the COVID lockdown, I've done a couple conventions in the UK. I've done a lot of stuff around the country. And yes, everybody's super awesome consistently everywhere I go. But it's also that exposure to different styles of play is so important. It occurred to me while we were talking about this that probably the strongest player, certainly one of the strongest players in the Atlanta meta is John Goldborn, who I know has been up in your neck of the woods a few times. And he is also the person that back when we did conventions was always going to a convention somewhere. And Wandering those two things are Wandering River style, exactly. And those two things, the exposure to different metas and the fact that he's a really good player, are directly causally related.
Oh, no question. No question. Yeah. No, John, part of the reason, there's two reasons that John is a good player. One, he's smart as hell. Mm-hmm. And two, he's well-traveled. He's played everywhere. And that makes a difference, no question. And that's why he's always a contender, everywhere he plays. And much like Texas, I wish John was a jerk because it would make it easier to hate him, but it turns out he's a pretty nice guy to boot. So, how about you, Jim? The things that Brian talked about, the things that Nick talked about, how much of that do you share? Is there something that because I know you work with technology like I do, is there something about the analog aspect that you love? Well, what do you love about tabletop gaming?
I think a lot of the points that all three of you brought up are really the reasons that I love these games. Definitely, getting away from the screens for a bit and is good. Hanging out and, chit-chatting over card flips is a lot of fun. I've definitely, I remember many a night when I'd be the odd man out at a faux night, and it's not even a problem. I'll just, hang out and we'll talk about, whatever's happening as we go through. And that's a good night of faux, right? Watch faux is not a problem.
Yep.
I think what brought me into this space is, pretty models and cool artwork and stuff like that. And that's definitely a thing that keeps me around is, what's the next new model? Oh, wait, they're bringing out a dinosaur on a 50. That looks amazing. I gotta get into that faction, right? I've got a giant box full of Nightmare Crews for factions that I'm probably never going to play because every time I see one, I have to have it.
Yeah. Guys, this was fun. And I'm hoping for those that have listened that you've, if you've not found things that hopefully will help you a little bit, hopefully you've at least related to know that you're not alone. The one point I think I want to hammer home is something I talked about a little bit earlier, which is even the best players have gone through and fought the battles that we're talking about today. So things that I struggle with, that Brian, Nick, and Jim have struggled with, the people that are playing well have struggled with it too, and they beat it. So you've got to decide, do I want, first of all, decide if I want to be a better player. To a certain degree, I'm happy where I am. I like the level of play that I have. It doesn't mean I don't compete. It doesn't mean I don't try to get better, but I'm not going to quit my job to become the best faux player in the world. And quite frankly, winning at faux is not why I play it. But I do play competitive games because I try to get better at this. So picking up on those things is key. Guys, this was not necessarily an easy thing to sign up for. It's one thing to have Third Floor Wars reach out and say, Brian, I hear you're the best Misaki player in the world, and we'd like you to do a deep dive.
And then they woke up.
Yeah, that's real easy to say yes to. It's another thing for me to throw the line out there and go, how many people suck and want to talk about it? So I appreciate it. But Brian, I know for a fact that you've got some plugs. So talk to me about your podcast.
Yeah, the podcast I co-host is called The Ascent of Board Games, and it's basically a monthly podcast, because who has time for more than that? Obviously, some people do. But it's basically about, we pick a genre or a style of game and sort of talk about where it started, how it evolved over the time. It's mostly an excuse for us to talk about games we like. So, of course, we ramble a lot, but I think we have a pretty good crew and we have a good time doing it. I just released an episode today, which is the first part of our episode on Heartbreakers, which is the games we really wanted to love and they really screwed us. So that one's a lot of fun. And if I had to say one thing about this this topic to summarize it all, is one that's been coming to mind a lot to me lately for different reasons, which is before you're good at something, you have to be crappy at it for a long time.
Very true. Very, very true. Very, very true. Yeah. If you guys don't, and I'm going to have a link to Brian's podcast. If you haven't listened to it, I highly recommend it. It's a very interesting voice about board games, and it gives you a contextual understanding of board games. But probably the biggest thing is that it's a bunch of dudes that love board games. And if you like board games, you're like, yeah, this is good. This is good. So it's one of the ones that every month when it comes out, it goes to the top of my queue. Nick, do you have any shout outs or plugs?
I got a shout out to our Texas meta. Doug runs a hell of a meta. We've got some great players here in the area. Andre, Brian, Travis, and Dreads just do a great job trying to foster a good environment for new players to come and play and to better the area as a whole, to represent for when we eventually get back to the Faux Tour, which I know will be coming in the distant or near future.
Near, let's hope for near.
Near,
let's hope
near.
for near. How about you, Jim?
Oh, I got to say one more thing. Thank
Please.
you to all the content creators out there that keep my commute and my mundane data entry tasks interesting. So thank you all. Third Floor Wars, Schemes and Stones, Steam Power Scoundrels, Swamp Fiends, and the other 2 or 3 that are out there that I occasionally listen to. So there's a lot of great content.
We're starting to see new ones pop up. We're starting to see some new YouTube channels pop up. We're starting to see some new podcasts pop up devoted to Malifaux. That's a very good sign about the health of the game. Unfortunately for Steam Forged, I think that the death of Guild Ball will prove to be helpful to Malifaux as well. I know Bushido has gotten a nice little
so much pent up nerd rage. That could be a whole separate podcast.
Talking about too soon, huh, Jim?
And let's campaign to bring Travis Wayforth back to Malifaux. Come on, Travis.
Oh, dude, I've tried both him and Alex. It's
publish that comment and see what he says.
Yeah. Trust me, I've had the conversation. Jim, how about you, my friend? Do you have any plugs or shout outs?
I feel like I should at least plug the 3 Minute War Game guys. They're good buddies of mine. They're good buddies of yours as well. So
yep.
And Brushlicker Studios, our buddy Malloy, I can plug him too. So, and obviously
he has painted the vast majority of the terrain that you see on the 3rd floor. Mike's a good guy.
And I guess obviously the henches around the NC metas are also a great bunch that keeps us all playing and having a good time.
No, I was just going to throw one more in if I can, because Jim reminded me. I wanted to give a shout out to Haunted Miniatures, because I've reached a point now where I don't have the time to. I mean, my models have never looked that great, and I don't have the time to paint them even to my crappy tabletop standard. Haunted Miniatures is gradually doing the entire faction for me. Wow. And just does amazing work, and I couldn't be happier. So,
that's great. We'll definitely link to them. So shoot me the link so I can put it in the show notes. That's great.
Will do.
So, guys, I do appreciate it. I appreciate you taking the time and sitting with me. And for those of you that stuck around to the end, thanks for listening. Take care. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Twitch so you don't miss the avalanche of content we create. Links are in the show notes. Be sure to check out our shop on thirdfloorwars.com for the latest in gaming apparel and gear. There you'll also find the latest information for the US Faux Tour. Find out where you rank in your conference or even in the entire United States. Get those models built, painted, and ready so we can see you at the next US Faux Tour Masters event. Please take a moment to write a review of this pod on your favorite platform. Rating and reviewing helps us find more listeners almost as cool as you are. Be sure to share this feed with all of your friends who love tabletop gaming. Thanks for listening. Howdy folks, Craig here. Now if you love gadgets as much as we do, you're going to love the new Third Floor Wars Gadget Bundle from Schooner Labs. Branded with the logo of your favorite podcast, it comes with 2 measuring multi-tools, a compass stepper for those tight and important movements, along with a compact dashboard to track your turn, strat, and scheme scoring along with your soul stones and pass tokens. It is the perfect bundle for anyone who plays Malifaux or just wants to look cool while doing it. The link is in the show notes. Check them out and help support your favorite gaming podcast. All right, guys. This will be short. This will be good, though.
Yeah. Craig. I was going to say, Craig, you mentioned something that was great about kind of setting expectation, because Doug Bowman, he's the TO in our area. He'll flat out say, hey, you're going to get your butt kicked. Just know that. Yep. But try to learn. We're going to talk you through the process of why. Mm-hmm. You're going to see the worst of the worst so you can prepare next time, but don't take it as a negative play experience. Take it as a learning lesson so you can get better next time. You're going to get your butt kicked a lot, but there'll be a moment when you have that I get it, and you'll start succeeding. And you set the precedence from the get-go, and I think that's what's helped foster our community locally.
Well, I've said it on the podcast. The worst thing about you guys in Texas is that you're all really, really good at what you do. You're all really good players, and you're not jerks. Like, you're nice people. Like, it'd be much easier just to hate you guys. Yeah, it'd be much easier just to go, you know what? Screw Texas, because they're a bunch of jerks. But it turns out you guys are. Well, I'll clarify. You think you're good. Well, we still got masters in order to decide that.
As a California boy, how about I sum this up? Texans are narcissists, but they love what they do. And they're great people. There is such thing as Southern hospitality, but they are narcissists for sure.
All right, so I think I'm going to go back Nick, Brian, Jim on this one. So the idea is a little bit, why do we love tabletop gaming so much? Why do we put so much time and energy into it? Because really, all 4 of us in our own way do that, whether it be content creation, whether it be playing 6 vassal games, a month, or, playing 100 games in 100 days with our wife. We all have our love for it. So I want to kind of talk about it, but I do want to talk about it maybe a little bit in the context of where we are right now, as far as the pandemic. So I'll start with you probably, Nick. All right.
Okay.
So probably go Jim, Brian, Nick.
Okay.
You guys got me on tilt just talking about tilt.
That's funny.
Sweating over here.
I'm just so excited that all the things I'm hearing you guys say, I'm like, yeah, I do that too.
Those are my things.
Not just me.
It's my prediction, guys, that this is going to be a really good episode for people to listen to, because it's cathartic, right? Just to hear that, you're not alone.
Right.
And let's be frank, there's more people like the 4 of us than there are like Cody Hyatt and Jim Varney.
Yeah. Right. That guy just blows me away on his analytical thinking in this game, and how
that's why it's great just to listen to the commentary on the live stream. It's just like, that seems so obvious when he says it out loud using words.
Yeah. Yeah, I would hate for him to commentate something.
But my brain doesn't. My brain doesn't think that way.
Between a couple of, I guess, Craig and Jim have already had their game. Maybe Nick and I should get a game and have them do a commentary
and have Cody do commentary.
That may be the worst thing we've seen, but it's only turn 2, so there's plenty of room to screw things up.
Again, I haven't listened yet, but I expect if at one point Cody didn't say, "Has Jim read these cards at all?" I'll be disappointed.
They were very, both him and Doug were very opinionated, but they were very kind at the same time.
Sure.
There was a couple times, and he said it to both of us. It was like, Craig doesn't realize that model can do this, or Jim hasn't figured out yet what's happening, which is a kind way of saying Craig's an idiot and so is Jim. But it's a reality, right?
Yeah, I watched it up to about turn 2, and I remember at one point they were doing this whole thing, Craig doesn't see it, and then an activation later, it's like you just did one of these, and it's like, oh, Craig saw it.
Yep. But that speaks to how well Doug and Cody know the game.
Oh yeah, they can even tell
in 4D chess. Yeah. Yep. No, I completely agree. All right. Sorry. So Jim, Brian, Nick. All right. I'll bring us back.
Hey, gentlemen, can I take a 1 minute break to go say goodnight to my kid?
That seems fair.
Jesus, dude.
I know.
Priorities.
I'm an asshole. I know priorities.
Yeah, I'm gonna get a new beer. I'll be right back.
Yeah.
All right, so Jim, do we hijack the show now?
There we go. I have a lot of opinions.
Yeah,
and they're mostly
you're going
wrong.
to hear them. Yes, exactly. Hence, we're on this show.
Running through first turns in Vassal actually sounds like a real good idea. I should get that set up and at least give it a couple tries.
Yeah, I find myself doing that a lot. You know, it's not perfect because you don't really necessarily have terrain there or anything like that. But just
Sure.
in an issue of, okay, if these people need to be within 6 inches of each other for this and 4 inches for that, how can I move them in such a way that should, in theory, happen?
Yep. And see, I didn't have time to put them all on even a faux table, right? To think about it. Plus, they were all Craig's models, so I don't own. Well, I own them, but they're in boxes somewhere.
Right.
So I was like, oh, I know they all have to be within 3 of this marker. And then I read the card again. I'm like, oh crap. They actually need to be within 3 of the Gravedigger, not the marker.
Now everything is horrible.
Everything is different. Because I had the Gravedigger on a flank. I was like, I'll just put him on the flank, and then he'll just walk right out, and it'll be great. And I was like, oh, that won't work. That other half of the crew won't get the focused, and they're all going to want that focused.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and what I've been running into lately is, you know, I like to have a lot of healing in my crew, or, you know, at least some healing in the crew, which is easy in 10 Thunders. You can bring a Tanuki and everything. But it's like, all right, well, I've got these guys can kind of heal themselves, and I've got a Tanuki that'll be fine. So I don't really need to worry about it as much. But that little dude cannot be everywhere at once.
right.
So I just gotta, you know, take into account that I need either to deploy him better and be more cognizant of where I'm putting him, so he's not just running around putting out fires, or I need to bring a second one.
Yeah, I feel like I have like pieces of a plan. You know what I mean? And it's like all of these little pieces, but I didn't put them together to make a whole plan. I just have pieces and parts of a plan.
Yep.
And when you hit the table and it's like, well, where does that piece fit now? I know what I could have done if everything else was right, but it's not exactly that now. So now what? Like I spent, I don't know, 20 minutes going over with Ray before our game. I said, hey, Ray, check my math. Ley line markers on the diagonal are 12.75 inches about apart from one another. And he says, yeah. And I said, well, if Seamus places right on the line next to it, he's within an inch, right? He's well within an inch. And because the 12-inch place means he gets to move effectively
to the other
13, he can move to the other one, right? And he says, yeah, that's true. And I said, so here's my question. If a model is in base contact with, let's say, the other side's marker, how far up the board do I have to be to push that model off the marker with, say, terrorize? And he says, well, you have to be all the way. You have to push him, you know, you can't push him behind the marker. You have to push him off to the side, to the left or the right. I said, Ray, I don't think he quite gets there. I should put a mat down and find out. Because could you imagine?
That's a whole thing.
If on this stream, I double jump Seamus all the way into his right at his deployment zone and push that model last activation off that marker to claim that point, and then just pop him back to the middle to wait.
Yeah.
Which would have been really cool if all of his models weren't in the middle of the board waiting for me there.
That's funny. That's funny.
And he says, I don't think that's going to work. And it definitely depends on the board state. Yeah. And what happens if you flip the Black Joker?
Yeah. So, Brian, I finished with you, right?
Yes.
You're last. Okay. So, Nick, I'll probably start with you.
Okay.
I'll go clockwise. I'll go Nick, Jim, Brian. Clockwise for me, at least. All right. All right. So we ended with Jim. We started with Nick. So I'm going to start with you, if that's all right, Brian.
Works for me.
All right, cool.
Real quick, Jim, if you want to play some Malifaux online Vassal, I'll make it really easy on you. You can get some practice.
You
in.
do, Nick, but
No, like I said, it's not as much about like playing Malifaux, I think, as it is about hanging out around the table and just chit chatting with the guys. Yeah. So it's just
I consider it
fidgety.
Better than nothing, but
yeah,
you're absolutely right. If I would rather mask up, glove up, hazmat suit up, and go to the game store and sweat my ass off than Vassal. But
sure.
one key thing I like about Vassal is, well, actually I hated about Vassal. I've gotten to try different factions, and now I own 3 freaking factions worth of model.
That's really funny.
I already own dipped into at least 3 factions.
It'd be tough for Jim and I to be in worse positions as far as that's concerned. All right, guys, I'll bring us back, and I'll start with you, Brian. Whether it is a player who has proven results for tactics and strategy. Wow, that's a terrible sentence.
Ooh, this script.
Let's see here. What am I trying to say here? Whether I'm looking for a player who has proven themselves. Time. Well, that's cool. So our next case is my next guest is Brian Schoner. Hey, are you still here? Look, the podcast is over. And you sat through all of the breaks and bloopers? Well, I mean, if you're here, you might as well run over to patreon.com and become a supporter. Don't forget to rate and review this podcast too while you're at it, on whatever platform you're listening to. I do appreciate you sticking around. Take care.